Imagine hosting the most important dinner party of your entire life. You know,
Yeah.
you spent all day preparing the meal, you serve your guest of honor, and then, well, it ends up being the very last thing they ever eat.
Yeah, I mean, the sheer gravity of a scenario like that is honestly hard to even process.
Right.
Because we aren't just talking about, a bad case of food poisoning here. We are talking about carrying the historical weight of serving a final fatal plate to a figure revered by millions.
And that is the exact situation we are exploring today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are looking at a really fascinating collection of historical texts, Buddhist scriptures, and modern scholarly analysis surrounding a specific dish.
Right, a dish known as Sukaramaddava.
Exactly. This is the final meal of the Buddha, prepared in ancient India by a metalworker named Cunda. And for thousands of years, people have just fiercely debated this single meal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, historians have argued over the recipe, theologians have debated its meaning.
And internet rumors have spun wildly out of control.
Exactly. But hidden beneath all those debates is a much deeper, entirely unexpected secret about human nature. It really is one of the most misunderstood events in ancient history.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Because when we actually analyze the primary sources, we find that the arguments over what was on the plate, they kind of obscure a profound narrative.
Yeah.
A story about resilience, extreme social pressure, and really how we frame the heavy burdens we carry.
But before we can get to the underlying psychology of that dinner, we do have to clear away some serious historical underbrush.
Definitely.
Because the sources dedicate quite a bit of time to dispelling modern myths. And there is one specific internet theory I see pop up constantly, that, well, it conflates this event with global dietary laws.
Oh, the pork prohibition theory?
Right. The rumor that because the Buddha supposedly died from eating a pork dish, that specific event somehow triggered the Islamic ban on eating pork. Which, I mean, it sounds a bit...
It's completely baseless. That is a classic case of historical data points being mashed together simply because they share a single keyword, just the word pork.
Right.
We can definitively put that to rest based on the historical timeline alone. Islam emerged over a millennium, about 1,100 years after the time of the Buddha.
Wait, really? 1,100 years?
Over 1,000 years later, yes. Geographically and chronologically, they are just worlds apart.
Wow. And the roots of the dietary laws don't even stem from the same continent, right?
Not at all. The Islamic dietary laws, including the prohibition against consuming pork, they stem directly from the Abrahamic traditions of the Middle East.
Okay.
If you trace the lineage back through early Jewish and Christian texts, you find very similar dietary restrictions established centuries before Islam even existed.
Right, so it's totally unrelated.
Completely. Within the Islamic tradition itself, the ban is fundamentally viewed as a direct divine commandment from God. It's an internal religious doctrine that developed completely independently of anything happening in the forests of ancient India.
It is so wild how a shared word in an English translation can spark a rumor that just, ignores 1,000 years of history.
It happens all the time online.
But that does bring up a broader question about diet that the sources address. Because there is a very common assumption today that all Buddhist monks, from the very beginning, have just been strictly vegetarian.
Right, I hear that a lot.
If that were true, the idea of the Buddha being served pork would be this massive scandal in its own right, wouldn't it?
It would be, but that assumption is incredibly widespread, precisely because it misunderstands the daily reality of early monastic life.
How so?
Well, the early followers of the Buddha were mendicants. They were wandering ascetics who possessed essentially nothing.
So they didn't have their own food supply.
Exactly. Every morning they would walk into a village with a begging bowl, stand silently, and rely entirely on the generosity of the local lay people to survive.
Oh, wow. I mean, if you were relying on whatever someone just drops into your bowl, you can't exactly hand them a list of dietary restrictions.
You really can't. Demanding a custom plant-based meal would completely contradict the practice of humility. You are supposed to be grateful for whatever is offered, recognizing the sacrifice that family made just to feed you.
But that creates a really fascinating ethical tension, doesn't it? Because Buddhism places a massive emphasis on nonviolence and compassion for all living things.
It does.
So how does a monk accept whatever is given without, contributing to the cycle of violence against animals?
To solve that, the Buddha established a really pragmatic framework known as the three purities.
Okay, the three purities. This is the rule that dictates when meat is actually acceptable to consume.
Yes, exactly. A monk is permitted to eat meat, but only if it meets three strict criteria. First, they must not have seen the animal being killed.
Okay.
Second, they must not have heard the animal being killed. And third, they must have absolutely no reason to suspect the animal was slaughtered specifically for them.
That is actually a brilliant way to handle the economics of the situation. It literally breaks the chain of supply and demand.
It completely sidesteps it.
Because if a village family already prepared a meat dish for their own sustenance, and they just offer a portion of those leftovers to a passing monk, the monk accepting it doesn't cause any additional harm.
Right. The violence has already occurred independent of the monk's presence. The monk's intention isn't to demand an animal's life, you know. Their intention is simply to accept the community's generosity.
Which centers the moral weight entirely on intention. And that is a concept I know we will see return in a major way regarding the final meal itself.
Oh, absolutely. Intention is everything in this story. Because as long as the monk's presence isn't driving the demand for slaughter, accepting the food maintains that crucial bond between the monastic community and the lay people without violating the principle of non-harm.
That context is so crucial. Because it means Cunda offering a meat dish wouldn't have been a taboo insult at all. It would have been a normal, perhaps even highly generous, offering from a working-class tradesman.
Precisely. It was a gesture of deep respect.
Which brings us to the meal itself, Sukaramaddava. What actually was it? Because the sources show that ancient scholars and modern linguists are still arguing over what this word actually means.
Yeah, the difficulty lies in the nature of ancient languages like Pali and Sanskrit. They are heavily compounded and highly contextual.
So it's not just a direct one-to-one translation.
Not at all. A single word can carry multiple legitimate translations depending on how you break down its roots and how you view the cultural context of the time. The ancient scholar Buddhaghosa, who wrote extensive commentaries in the 5th century, he noted this ambiguity. And modern historians have essentially grouped the debate into 4 distinct possibilities.
Okay, let's go through them. The most literal translation seems to be the first one, where you just break the compound word directly in half, right?
Right. Sukara means pig, and madava means soft or mild.
So you end up with a tender pork dish.
That is the most straightforward linguistic reading. It suggests Cunda prepared a prime, easily digestible cut of pork, likely a delicacy offered as a sign of immense respect.
But other scholars look at that exact same word and arrive at a completely different conclusion, right? By focusing on the ecological context of ancient India rather than the literal anatomy of a pig.
Exactly. This is the second theory.
And this is the theory that it wasn't meat at all, but something more like a truffle.
Right, a truffle or a mushroom. Wild pigs are notorious for rooting around in the dirt for specific types of tubers, wild mushrooms, and bamboo shoots.
Oh, that makes sense.
We see this in many languages, actually, where a plant is colloquially named after the animal associated with it. So, Sukaramaddava might simply mean the soft food enjoyed by pigs, referring to a specific earthy mushroom, or a root vegetable.
It's just linguistic shorthand, like how we call a plant a dogwood tree or horseradish.
Exactly.
It doesn't contain a dog or a horse, it's just a cultural naming convention. That is fascinating. And then there's a third theory that shifts away from a standard meal entirely and looks at the medicinal practices of the time.
Yeah, this interpretation suggests that Cunda wasn't just cooking dinner. He was attempting to administer a specialized health tonic.
Because the Buddha was in his 80s at this point, right?
Yes. He had been traveling extensively, and the texts indicate he was already experiencing significant physical illness before he even arrived at Chunda's home.
So Cunda, seeing an elderly, ailing teacher, prepares this restorative elixir based on ancient Ayurvedic or traditional medical texts. Something incredibly rich or potent designed to give him strength.
Exactly. And finally, modern linguists studying the evolution of regional dialects offer a fourth highly pragmatic option.
Which is?
They suggest Sukaramaddava might just be the proper name of a localized herb or plant endemic to that specific region.
So it's just a local name that got lost.
Basically, yeah. The original meaning could have simply been lost to time as the language evolved over thousands of years, leaving later scholars to endlessly debate a word that local villagers would have recognized instantly.
We could easily spend hours just debating the merits of a truffle versus a medicinal broth. But as you dig deeper into the source material, it becomes really obvious that obsessing over the ingredient list completely misses the broader historical and psychological point.
It really does miss the forest for the trees.
Because regardless of whether it was pork or a root vegetable, the effect of the food on the Buddha's body was catastrophic.
It was fatal.
And that effect raises a very uncomfortable, almost taboo question about how this event unfolded.
It forces a confrontation with the concept of the Buddha's own agency. According to the texts, the Buddha possessed supreme foresight and deep wisdom.
Right. And if he had that level of awareness, he must have known this meal was either toxic, spoiled, or simply too rich and heavy for his failing digestive system. Yet he chose to consume it anyway.
He did.
To a modern observer looking at that sequence of events, a man knowing a substance will kill him and choosing to eat it anyway, it looks uncomfortably close to a form of self-harm, or even suicide.
From a purely secular modern perspective, I completely understand why someone would make that logical deduction. But applying that label fundamentally misunderstands the mechanics of Buddhist philosophy, specifically the concept of karma.
How so?
Well, in Buddhism, the physical action itself is only part of the equation. The absolute core metric by which any action is judged is the intention behind it. Volition is everything.
And the sources make a point to outline a very specific timeline to back this up, don't they? The texts claim the Buddha had already made a conscious, declarative decision to relinquish his life force 3 months prior to arriving at Chunda's house.
That timeline is vital to understanding the event. His passing was not viewed as a tragic accident cut short by a bad meal. It was an inevitability of impermanence.
Right.
His physical form was exhausted. The food was not the root cause of his death. It was merely a physical complication, a catalyst for a moment that was already arriving. Suicide, in the Buddhist framework, is generally understood as an act driven by a desire to escape suffering or annihilate the self.
And the Buddha was not trying to escape.
Exactly. He wasn't running away from anything.
You know, it reminds me of a firefighter running into a burning building. The firefighter sees the collapsing roof. They feel the heat. They are acutely aware that stepping through that door might result in their death. But no one would ever label that firefighter suicidal.
No, of course not.
Because their intention isn't to end their own life. Your intention is an act of extreme compassion to save whoever is trapped inside. The risk to their own body is an accepted byproduct of that compassion, not the goal.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. The Buddha stepped into the burning building, so to speak, to protect Chunda.
Because if he had refused the food, if he had pushed the plate away and announced that it would harm him, he would have been rejecting the ultimate offering of a deeply devoted follower. Chunda was offering the absolute best he had. Rejecting that wouldn't just be a social faux pas. It would be spiritually devastating for Chunda. It would imply his best wasn't good enough, or worse, that his offering was tainted.
And the Buddha possessed the empathy to look across the table, recognize the immense love and devotion in the offering, and weigh that against the physical agony it would cause his own failing body.
So he just took the hit.
He chose to absorb the physical harm to spare Chunda the emotional and spiritual rejection.
And he even took steps to ensure the harm stopped with him. The texts describe a very specific instruction he gave immediately after eating his portion. He told Chunda to take all the remaining Sukaramaddava and bury it in the earth.
Yeah, that detail is incredible.
He explicitly stated that no one else, no other monk, no other human being could digest it.
He essentially quarantined the harm. By having it buried, he ensured the physical danger was completely neutralized. He quietly took the entire burden onto himself, shielding his community from the physical consequences of the meal.
The physical protection is remarkable, but the part of this story that really sticks with me is the psychological aftermath.
Right.
Because the Buddha was leaving, he was transitioning into nirvana, meaning his physical suffering was coming to an end. But Chunda had to wake up the next day. I want you to imagine being in Chunda's shoes for a second. The community is grieving the loss of their teacher. You are the tradesman who prepared the final meal. You are the one who served the plate.
The historical weight of that realization would be suffocating.
The village gossip, the sidelong glances, the whispers among the disciples. In a tight-knit religious community, the social pressure and the internal guilt of being the catalyst for the Buddha's passing would absolutely destroy a person's mind.
It would be an unbearable torment. And this is where we see the Buddha's mastery not just of philosophy, but of human psychology. He completely anticipated this crisis.
He saw it coming.
He knew the crowd would eventually turn their grief into blame, and he knew Chunda would internalize that blame. So before he passed, he issued a binding, highly specific instruction to his closest attendant, Ananda.
He essentially gave Ananda a script to use for damage control, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
He instructed Ananda that if anyone tries to make Chunda feel remorse, or if Chunda begins to doubt himself, Ananda must go to him immediately. He must deliver a message directly from the Buddha, stating that Chunda's offering was not a mistake, but a meal of supreme, unmatched merit.
And to understand how powerful that statement is, we have to look at what the Buddha compared it to. He didn't just offer empty comfort. He specifically elevated Chunda's meal to equal exactly one other meal in history.
Oh, wow.
He linked it to the offering made by a woman named Sujata many years earlier.
Sujata is a massive figure in the early texts. During the Buddha's early ascetic years, when he was basically starving himself in the forest, trying to find enlightenment through extreme deprivation, it was Sujata who offered him a nourishing bowl of milk rice.
Right, and that single meal of milk rice provided the physical sustenance he desperately needed. It gave his body the strength to sit beneath the Bodhi tree, abandon extreme asceticism, and finally attain enlightenment.
So Sujata's meal was the catalyst for his awakening.
Exactly.
The symmetry he creates there is stunning. Sujata's meal provided the energy to transition from an ordinary man into an enlightened Buddha. And Chunda's meal, despite its physical toll, provided the energy for his final transition, stepping out of the cycle of rebirth, out of samsara, and into eternal nirvana.
It represents the alpha and the omega of his spiritual journey. By permanently linking Chunda to Sujata in the historical record, the Buddha executed a masterful psychological reframe.
He took an event that the entire society was preparing to label as a tragic mistake, a literal cause of death, and he redefined it before the narrative could even solidify.
He flipped the script.
He changed the definition of the meal from a poison that ended a life to the fuel that enabled ultimate liberation.
It is the ultimate shield against the crushing weight of public scrutiny. But to truly grasp the depth of this interaction, we have to look at the specific character of Chunda himself.
Because it wasn't just a coincidence that it was him.
Right.
No, the sources suggest this wasn't just a random encounter with a local tradesman. The Buddha accepted this burden from Chunda specifically because he knew who Chunda was at his core.
The texts identify Chunda not just as a follower, but as a sotapanna.
Which translates to a stream enterer. In Buddhist cosmology, a stream enterer is someone who has achieved a profound, irreversible level of spiritual awakening.
Okay.
They have caught a glimpse of absolute reality and have entered the stream that inevitably flows toward enlightenment.
So they aren't fully enlightened yet, but their foundation is unshakable. They are no longer entirely bound by ordinary worldly anxieties or, the illusion of ego in the way an average person is.
Exactly, and because of that deep internal stability, the text described Chunda as possessing a diamond heart.
A diamond heart.
Yeah. If an ordinary person, someone with a fragile sense of self or a desperate need for public approval, had cooked that final meal, the guilt would have broken them. The whispers of the crowd would have driven them to despair or self-destruction.
It is an incredibly heavy burden to place on someone, but it shows a profound level of trust. The Buddha knew that Chunda's diamond heart was strong enough and clear enough to hold this massive paradox. Chunda had the wisdom required to accept that his meal precipitated the death of his teacher, while simultaneously holding absolute faith in the Buddha's reframe, that he was a benefactor offering the ultimate gift, regardless of what the gossiping villagers said.
The Buddha trusted Chunda to carry the historical weight of that final meal without shattering under the pressure of society's misunderstanding. He knew Chunda wouldn't let the crowd dictate his reality.
When we set out on this deep dive, we started with a literal argument over an ancient recipe. We were looking at translations of pork and mushrooms.
Right.
But peeling back those layers revealed an incredibly moving lesson on the mechanics of empathy. We see a teacher willing to endure physical agony to protect a student's spirit, and a student with a heart resilient enough to bear the weight of history. It's a blueprint for reframing our own perceived failures.
It truly is. And as we conclude our analysis of these sources, I think the concept of the diamond heart offers a fascinating lens for our own lives, particularly regarding the social pressure Chunda faced.
Definitely.
Because human nature hasn't fundamentally changed in 2.5 millennia. We just have faster tools for gossip.
Yeah, the ancient village whispers have been replaced by the modern internet. It is a world built almost entirely on public scrutiny.
We live in an era of viral outrage, cancel culture, and instant global public shaming. A world where millions of voices can weigh in on your worst moment, analyzing your intentions before they even know the facts.
Right, everyone's a critic.
We are constantly bombarded by the crowd telling us who we are and what our actions mean. The story of Chunda forces us to ask a difficult question. How often do we allow the whispers of the crowd to dictate our own self-worth? If your intentions were entirely misunderstood by the world tomorrow, do you possess the diamond heart required to hold on to your own truth? Or would you surrender your narrative and let the crowd write your story for you?
To know your own intentions so deeply that the judgment of the crowd simply cannot shatter you. It's a powerful standard to strive for. Thank you for walking through this ancient mystery with us and uncovering the profound human story beneath it.
It has been a deeply rewarding exploration.
We will see you on the next deep dive.